cage. Jake and Marco were crammed together in a single wire birdcage, which was sitting on a table in the Sharing's hangout area of the cavern. Some of the human controllers were in their sauna, pulling slices of stuffed crust pizza out of a box. Others were wiping down tools at the table next to the cage, and another small group was talking in hushed tones just outside the doorway where they'd seen Visser 3 disappear into yesterday. Tom was among those cleaning tools, and he and the others were making guesses as to what kind of birds they'd caught. "Definitely some kind of pigeon," Tom said. "In the North Pole? More like a penguin." "Have you seen a penguin? They have like tuxedos on." "He's probably never seen a tuxedo either." Any elf in the room could have identified 2 turtle doves on sight, but no one in the Sharing thought to ask. "Hey, I'm gonna grab one of the pizzas back from our boys in the hot tub. Anybody want something?" "Yeah! Grab me a slice with penguin on it." Jake and Marco were trying their best to ignore this endless chatter all around them and focus instead on what their next move might be to escape. Jake was quiet again. He knew it was his fault they were in the cage. He'd blown their cover, and Marco gave himself up in order to stay with Jake. For now, the worst part was having to listen to the Sharing rattle on, Tom included. But they both knew if they couldn't get away, they'd end up as toppings on pizza too. Or worse. Finally, a voice mentioned something they'd been waiting to hear. Visser Claus should be just getting out of his private pool now. He wanted one last soak before the big trip. "I heard his private pool has whirlpool jets," Tom said. "I heard it has an eggnog tap right beside it." The first voice spoke again, quietly this time. "Has anyone else noticed having to soak up Candrona rays more often up here?" "Yeah, it must be the cold or something." "Did you guys get a good look at the modifications those elves made to Visser Claus's ship? His sleigh? That thing's set up to defy every law of physics now." "Once Santa's plugged in. Too bad none of us get to go on the maiden voyage." "It won't be long, though, for the rest of the fleet. From what I heard, a single reindeer should be enough for each ship." Jake and Marco thought about Dancer plugged into a Yerk ship. It was too much to imagine. And they didn't have much time to imagine either, because there was movement now. The Sharing members at the doorway were positioning themselves on both sides in lines. From beyond the doorway, a sound of movement. Jake and Marco had seen this before, but it still didn't prepare them for what came next. Out of the carved doorway emerged 2 Santas. "Ho, ho, ho," said one Santa. "'Tis the season." "To be yerky," said the other Santa. "Oh yeah." From inside their cage, Jake and Marco glanced at each other. What was going on? "Most excellent updates, all. Derg 791 has been controlling Santa for almost 4 hours now. We will be fully prepared for liftoff at midnight." The other Santa, indistinguishable from the first, advanced to the Sharing. "Have the inspections on the sleigh been completed? I'm anxious to connect Santa to the mainframe and fire it up." Someone exited the Sharing pool and approached the Santas. "Our inspections are complete, Visser Claus," he said, looking back and forth between the Santas. "Tinker Elves are running each system individually to isolate any possible issues, and they will be finished no later than 11. "Excellent," a Santa said. I'm imagining it now. What are those turtle doves doing in your workspace? Jake and Marco both felt their heartbeats skip as Santa's eyes passed over them before settling on Tom? I told you they were penguins, whispered one of the sharing. Tom said, Santa, Visser Claus, we trapped them in. Get them out of here! Dispose of them! Or see if the bake elves can use them, the other Santa shouted. Yes, of course, Visser Claus, Tom replied, frozen in his chair, still holding a grease rag in his hand. The Santa's eyes left Tom and scanned the wide cavern. It wouldn't be long now before all this work at the North Pole would begin to pay off. Santa, said a Santa, let's go inspect the sleigh ourselves. I'm sure we wouldn't be interfering with the Tinker Elf system checks if we're just looking. The other Santa said, Very well. The sharing. I want to be absolutely certain you understand that when we're on our flight tonight, it is up to you to maintain control here. Although the trip will age us by years, to you, we will only be gone for a matter of hours. Upon our return, we will be bringing you an army of hosts to control. With that, the Santas took leave of the sharing, making their way across the cavern towards the large ramp. Jake and Marco watched the two identical figures walking away. Although they'd achieved the first part of their mission, in a way, finding Santa, the second part where they saved him seemed completely out of reach. If anything, they needed someone to save them. Standing above the cage, Tom put down the rag and wiped his dirty hands on his work smock. A very small part of his brain thought, I should be snowboarding right now. But the thought quickly dissipated. He put both hands on the top of the wire cage, but was staring straight ahead, past the turtle doves, past the yerk pools, past the Santas, and to the ramp. Descending the slope was one of the largest creatures he'd ever seen. First the 4 legs, then its bulky body, head, and finally, antlers. A large reindeer entered the cavern and was facing the Santas. A Santa said, You should still be at the council, Dancer. Above all of them, above the cavern and above the factory floor, the fire elves were perched in the top half of the massive Christmas tree, branches straining under the weight. None of the other elves followed them up the tree, fortunately, though many continued throwing items toward them for a while, forcing the fire elves ever higher up the tree. The mood in the interior of the tree was somber. Most of the picket signs had been dropped at the base when they'd had to scramble up for cover, adding a further disappointment for the fire elves. Grad Lillet, ever the organizer, continued giving encouraging speeches every so often to try to lift everyone's spirits. We're still all here. Although we're forced out right now, we stay together. Our cause and our resolve are unbroken. At any point when we could have been broken, the fire elves stuck together. Lifting the mood briefly was one thing, but being stuck in a tree for hours or longer was another, and the fire elves looked defeated. Rachel was alongside them, seated on a branch with 4 other fire elves. She thought of herself as a fire elf now too, but unlike them, she'd seen yerks up close, and Visser 3, and a dying Andalite prince. She'd seen friends and families destroyed when one became a controller. As she was remembering all that had come before this moment, her gaze drifted around, her eyes not focusing on any one thing. It was too much. There was too much. She was still just a kid, too. Just a kid who hadn't been able to find. It couldn't be. Rachel's eyes focused, and she sat straight upright, shaking the branch and startling the other fire elves seated on it. She didn't see them. She could only see one thing, still higher above her, where the Christmas tree came to a point. "No way," she whispered aloud as she was piecing it together in her mind. Of course, the Yerk pools were in the cavern, directly before the factory floor. When her friends reported back, they'd said the only light comes through wells in the cavern ceiling. When they'd arrived at the toy factory originally, the very first thing they noticed was the spectacular decorations on the massive Christmas tree. And now she saw the tree topper for what it was, the Canderona. She looked back down. No fire elves had followed her gaze. They remained as dejected as before. "The Canderona," she said, louder. A few fire elves heard her now. "I found the Canderona." "What do you mean, Rachel?" questioned Grad Lillet. "We haven't moved in hours. You found the Canderona?" "Yes," Rachel responded, more excited now, and pointed up. "On top of the Christmas tree. It's been there all along." As she explained her deduction, the fire elves looked up, and it seemed so obvious now. Brilliant light emitted from it in an even pulse, and its construction was unlike any elven craft. "I just don't know how we're going to get to it," Rachel said, as it was another 20 feet beyond where even the smallest fire elf was able to stand. "There must be a way to destroy it from here," Rachel trailed off, considering the possibilities. But every fire elf in that Christmas tree had already decided how to do it. Grad Lillet spoke for them all. "Burn it all down," as she struck a match and tossed it into the tree.
Dancer remained standing at the foot of the ramp's incline, facing the two Santas. "Season's greetings, Santa. We haven't received the final flight plans for tonight, so the council sent me to check on them," Dancer said. One Santa opened and then closed his mouth, as if starting to speak. After a moment, he said, "If anyone should have come up with flight plans, it should have been Blitzen, not you. There's at least 2 reindeer above you authorized to make pre-flight analysis. So unless they're both incapacitated, which should have been reported to me previously as well, then I'd say you're in violation of Christmas Eve protocol, Dancer." "Correct, Dancer," said the other Santa, began. "We'll be expecting your arrival at the standard Christmas Eve pre-flight check-in time at the authorized departure point. You may return to the Reindeer Council and assure them that there will be plenty of time to fit them in their harnesses before midnight." Dancer didn't move. The idea had been to arrive at the cavern, bust Santa out of his cage, and get him back to the Reindeer Council. Now there were 2 Santas. Surely one must have been Mr. 3. But even as close as the Santas were, they were identical in every way. Even their words and speech were impossible to distinguish. Still, there must be a way to. "Dancer!" came a voice from behind as the descending ramp arrived a second reindeer. As this reindeer approached the landing, he could see 2 pairs of boots, 2 red coats, 2 white beards, 2 Santas. "Dancer!" both Santas yelled in unison. "Dancer!" said the new reindeer. "Dancer, it's me," said the first Dancer privately to the newly arrived reindeer. Standing at the landing ramp, 2 dancers stood to face 2 Santas. What? Across the cavern, the Sharing stood still, unsure what they should be doing in this situation. Everyone who had been lounging in the sun was now out, wrapped in towels and watching. Tom's hands were resting on top of the birdcage, and he was making no movements as transfixed as everyone by the scene occurring across the cavern. "Dancer," Marco said, so only Jake could hear. "And Cassie! It has to be Cassie! Oh, I knew they'd make it. Which one do you think is Cassie, Jake?" Jake was watching too, splitting his time, keeping an eye on Tom. "I really can't tell, Marco," he replied. Unimpressed with the answer, Marco continued. "Come on, Jake. I know you can tell which one is Cassie. Don't ask me how, but I'm certain you'd recognize her. Here, if she morphed into an alligator, you'd probably be able to recognize her." No response from Jake. "I'm pretty sure she could tell if it was you too." He turned to give Jake a friendly punch on the shoulder, and in their turtle dove morphs, it was amounted to a wave of the wing. Jake felt a wave of emotion pass over him, and let himself enjoy it for just a moment. Marco was right. Jake knew exactly which dancer was actually Cassie. She'd arrived first, on her own, ready to do whatever it took. And although the thought of Cassie as an alligator was a stretch, he was certain he'd be into it. "Oh, on the right," Jake said. "The other one is actually Dancer." "Where are the rest of the reindeer, I wonder?" Now it was Marco's turn to not to say anything. Although he was overjoyed to see these two reindeers, it was hardly the reinforcement they'd been expecting. "What kind of joke is this?" Santa demanded. "We don't have time for your reindeer games right now." The other Santa continued. "I also would like to know how there would seem to be a duplicate of you, Dancer." But turning to the first Santa, "If they're multiplying, they may even prove more useful in the future. Imagine how many sleighs we could lead." As the Santa discussed the possibilities of additional reindeer to the Yerk plans, Cassie said secretly to Dancer, "I don't know which Santa is Visser 3 and which is the real one with the Yerk in his brain. We have to figure it out. I have no idea." Cassie, as Dancer lifted her four hooves ever so slightly off the ground, just hovering above the rough stone surface. Without looking away from the Santas, she said to Dancer, "Just follow my lead." Dancer saw Cassie's feet in the air and slowly rose from the ground as well. The Santas were facing each other, their Yerk brains caught in a flurry of ideas of how to equip additional ships to expand the North Pole operation to somewhere slightly warmer, and paying way less attention to the two dancers that were now rising off the ground. Their conversation abruptly stopped when they both heard a small voice in their head singing, "You know Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen, Comet and Cupid and Donner and Blitzen. But do you recall the most famous reindeer of all?" Dancer heard it in his head too. The singing continued more confidently. "Oh, Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer had a very shiny nose." Dancer understood and joined in. "And if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows." Unlike Cassie, Dancer couldn't hide his voice, and his booming baritone echoed off the stone walls. "All of the other reindeer," Cassie and Dancer sang, lifting off higher above the ground. She joined him, singing aloud now. "Used to laugh and call him names." They were rising into the air below them, ever so softly. One of Santa's whispered, "Like Pinocchio." Cassie and Dancer were fully in the air, circling each other across the room. Jake saw them. "They're dancing, Marco. Cassie's dancing." "Oh, they never let poor Rudolph join in any reindeer games." They continued to sing. The Santa said, "Like Monopoly," loud enough that Jake and Marco could hear it this time. Jake saw his opportunity. He focused on his older brother standing above his cage with an alien slug in his head. His only brother who he needed back. "Tom," he said. "Oh, then one foggy Christmas Eve," Dancer and Cassie sang, shimmering of electric lights flickering off their hooves, "Santa came to slay And then joining them from below, a deep bass, "Oh, Rudolph, with your nose so bright, oh, won't you guide my sleigh tonight?" The Santa belted out the line, but now was bent over as if in extreme pain. Cassie and Dancer watched, and their singing grew louder. Then all the reindeer loved him. Kneeling down on the floor, Santa said, "Loved him." "Tom, it's Jake. Tom, Merry Christmas. I miss you so much." Tom screamed in pain as the yerk in his head resisted. As they shouted out in glee, "Yippee!" Santa rose and pulled a disgusting yerk directly out of his ear. "Oh, Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer." "Tom, please." "You'll go down in history." Santa threw the yerk to the ground and stomped on it with the head of his boot. "Like this or three," he said, turning to the face of the other Santa.
Tom screamed again, lifting the birdcage above his head and throwing as hard as he could onto the ground. Inside, Jake and Marco flapped their wings violently, trying to remain upright and not take the full force of the hit. Still in the air, Cassie heard the scream, followed it through Tom to the birdcage and to Jake. She shouted, "Marco!" She tore toward Tom and the cage, ignoring the shouts from the sharing and elf controllers below. In a single graceful dive, she bit down on the bent wire birdcage and just as quickly ascended to the ceiling, searching for safety. She spotted the same alcoves Jake and Marco had perched in earlier that day and headed for the closest one. "Cassie, great singing," Marco said as she deposited them in the alcove. "I mean it too. I had no idea you were a singer." "Not now, Marco," Cassie replied. "Are you guys okay?" The two turtle doves looked a little worse for wear. "It is so good to see you," Jake said to Cassie, dazed. "Also not now," Cassie said, "but later." "Arg," they heard a scream from below. "Tom," Jake said. "That's Tom, I know it." He and Marco were out of the cage, but lying on the stone. That tumble had definitely stunned them. "Cassie, he was fighting it. I know it. When you and Dancer were singing, and Santa too, it all felt like Christmas again. He's so close, Cassie." Cassie couldn't fit in the alcove in her reindeer morph, and remained hovering in the air. She bent down her reindeer head and nuzzled this confused little turtle dove. With a flash of light, she was off, heading to Tom, who had both hands grasping his forehead. Across the cavern, Dancer had landed next to Santa, the real Santa, as they confronted Visitor 3. "Visitor 3, cast off that disguise. Your time in the North Pole ends before Christmas Day," Santa said. Visitor 3 said nothing, but shot them an evil look. "Ho, ho, ho. Ho, ho, ho." His laughs were getting louder, and his body began to change. "Ho, ho, ho. Ho, ho, ho." Visitor 3 morphed, no longer in Santa form, but returning to a shape familiar to Jake and Marco. He watched them from their perch. It was the same wintry monster as before, larger than they had remembered. "Yerks!" one of the two heads shouted. "Overwhelm them!" At that, every year-controlled elf, Hork-Bajir, and human in the cavern swarmed toward Santa and Dancer, all except one human, stretched over the back of a reindeer. Cassie appeared at the opening again and deposited Tom next to Jake and Marco. "No Christmas surprises from him yet, okay?" she said to them. "And one other thing, okay? For as tremendous as she'd just been, Cassie looked distraught. You guys haven't seen Tobias here yet, have you?" Jake and Marco shook their heads no. "Okay," Cassie said. I don't know where he is, guys. I don't know. He took off when the reindeer. Jake and Marco tried to focus their little turtle dove brains on what Cassie was saying. Behind her, though, Dancer was rocketing through the air, Santa had clearly grown in size to match Visitor 3's morph, and was currently holding one of the necks at bay. Around them, elf controllers, Hork-Bajir, and a few taxons were trying to take swipes at Santa, while Dancer worked equally hard to keep them away. The reindeer, you guys. They're not coming, Cassie said. Tom was lying on his back, as far into the alcove as he could. Jake now stood at his feet, singing, so only Tom could hear. Have yourself a merry little Christmas. Let your heart be light. Next year, all your troubles will be out of sight. Marco was still watching behind Cassie and thinking. He'd heard them say before that Yerkes managed to control Santa, just not for a long time once. It happened before. What was stopping it from happening again? There were so many elves and Hork-Bajir swarming Santa now, it was only a matter of time. We have to get out of here and help, Cassie, he said. We can both fly, that's an advantage, and we can help Dancer protect Santa. Cassie nodded. Marco turned to Jake. You take good care of Tom, okay? We're getting out of here. Jake stopped singing and said, I can come help. No, Jake, said Marco. You are helping. Right now, you're taking care of someone who needs your help. Even better that it happens to be your brother. With that, Marco and Cassie flew to meet Dancer in the air. He was moving so fast now, and the trail of sparkling light behind him traced his path. Magic, Marco said. As they approached, the entrance to the tunnel began glowing. Just a faint light at first, but then brighter, until a sparkling energy burst out. Matching Dancer's path, it was the rest of the reindeer. More magic, Cassie said.
The entire base of the Christmas tree was in flames. Once the fire elves, Rachel included, decided this was the way, there was no going back. They did try other options, sending the very smallest fire elves climbing to the top of the tree to push the Kandrona had been futile. Only 2 tiny fire elves could be at the peak at once, and the weight of the Kandrona was too great for them to budge. Shaking the entire tree by shifting all their weight from side to side had likewise been useless. Only the branches they were seated on moved much at all, and after one branch with 6 fire elves on it snapped, Gradley put a quick end to that. So they resorted to the thing they'd always known, fire. They would burn the whole thing down, and as the tree and the Kandrona would go down in flames, so would they. It would be the last stand of the fire elves. When the first branch snapped, it had been a real scare. 4 fire elves caught themselves in other branches, but 2 tumbled all the way to the ground. When they landed, other elves were waiting for them and rushed in to attack almost immediately. If it hadn't been for the quick hands of fire elves in the lowest branches hoisting them back up, those 2 would have taken an additional beating. Since then, the mob of angry elves surrounding the tree had only grown. The fire was now burning above and below the fire elves. Gradley started the fire above them, as close to the Kandrona as possible, but falling embers engulfed dry branches near the base, quickly consuming the pile of picket signs and loose objects scattered around the tree. Rachel stayed, even when given the opportunity to escape. Just morph into something. I know you have morphs that can fly, Gradley pleaded with her. There's no reason why you shouldn't escape. Survive this. Live to tell others what happened to the fire elves. No, Rachel said. She was as much a fire elf now as she was an animorph. Anyway, what I'd say is the fire elves stayed together. Gradley had no counter to that. It was, in fact, something she'd said earlier that day, trying to help fire elves keep the faith. She looked at Rachel, outfitted in her brand new fire elf uniform, grossly tall, but not for a human after all, with resolve on her face. Light from the flames flickered over everything, and Gradley felt certain that the fire elves had been together when it mattered most, when they walked off the factory floor. when a sheep who turned out to be a human girl arrived on their doorstep unexpectedly, when they were faced with unjust labor practices, and now they were putting a definitive end to the rule of an extraterrestrial life form hell-bent on domination and power. The fire elves had done all right, and now it was only fitting that they faced a death by fire. She closed her eyes, feeling a familiar and even comforting warmth from the fire below her. It crackled and sparked in a familiar way. In her millennia on this earth, how many fires had she listened to just like this? There was another sound too, lower, a steady rumbling, distant, but getting louder, getting much louder. She opened her eyes. From the interior of the tree, it was difficult to see the entire factory, but she could hear it. Every exterior door in the place slamming open, some breaking off their hinges completely. The rumbling was nearly deafening. Whatever it was inside the factory now. Up near the rafters, a quick glimmer like gold sparkled, disappeared, was back again, the flames reflecting off of hundreds of beads and long golden feathers. "What is that?" a fire elf shouted. "A phoenix," Gradley said. Tobias circled once around the Christmas tree, his sharp hawk eyes taking in every pine needle on every branch. Phoenix costume from the fire elves shimmering. He soared back down to the largest set of doors, waving his wings toward the tree. The rumbling noise was overwhelming, loud but intentional, strategic. A heavy mass of snow poured through the doors of the toy factory, with lumps of coal, carrots, and top hats spread throughout. "The snow people!" Rachel shouted. "Tobias is leading the snow people." She could see some of them through the branches. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them pouring over the factory floor to the Christmas tree. There were so many of them, but the fire is melting them. The first snow people who approached the burning tree were melting, their bodies collapsing in on themselves as the coal and carrots slid down into puddles of water. "Tobias!" Rachel shouted. "Get them out of here! They're melting!" "They know about the Yerks, Rachel," she heard Tobias say in her head. "When the Yerks first showed up in the North Pole, they tried to control the snow people. But it can't be done. No brains, just magic. But they've watched the Yerks ever since and want them out of here, just like we do." "But Tobias," Rachel began. "Morph, Rachel! Get out of there!" Tobias yelled. "Fire elves don't leave their own, and they sure as fuck don't disappear and not tell their friends where they're going," she shouted back. She was right, and Tobias knew it. Still, he brought the snow people to the rescue, right? But when Rachel had been escorted to the UFE Union Hall, he'd left. That's when he'd seen them, dozens of snow people that night, in the back alleys of the Fire Elf neighborhood. He'd followed them, watching, and returned to their ice castle today, leaving Cassie alone that time. So what if he'd ultimately done the noble thing, if he'd disappointed his friends all along the way? Maybe now wasn't the time to sort it all out, but he knew one thing he had to do. Circling down to lead the snow people charge once again, he then rose as quickly and as straight a flight as he could, making an abrupt 180-degree twist in the air, shaking loose all the feathers, the beads, the makeup off himself and into the fire below. "Rachel, we're Animorphs!" he screamed. "But I'm a fire elf too!" she yelled back. Below, something was happening. So many snow people continued reaching the fiery Christmas tree, and although they were still melting, they were piling up into a snow pile, extinguishing many of the lowest flames. The mound continued growing as additional snow people piled on, and then the lowest fire elves began jumping into the snow and sliding down onto the ground. Rachel watched the fire elves scrambling down the branches, watched the other snow people restrain elf controllers, hugging them in a snowy embrace. She looked up at the flames above, licking all sides of the Kandrona. She looked across at Gradley, still hugging the tree trunk. Rachel scooted nearer and reached out her hand. "Hold on, Gradley. Hold the trunk and hold on to my hand. Just for a minute. and concentrate, okay? Focus on me, Rachel said. A branch cracked above them, scattering embers all around. Rachel clasped Graduate's tiny hand, closed her eyes, and focused. The snow piles were high enough now that fire elves could work down through the branches and step onto the slope. At the bottom, snow people were meeting them, escorting them to safety, gathering all the fire elves together outside. Tobias continued to soar around the factory, squawking directions to the snow people ground force. A group of snow people broke off from the rest and began spilling down the staircase, arriving at the underground cavern to meet stunned and now terrified elf controllers, Hork-Bajir, and the Sharing. As above in the factory, they restrained the Yeerks from causing any more damage to others or to themselves. A turtle dove roosted high above, curled close beside a human teenager, now seated upright, watching it all. Above on the factory floor, 2 identical fire elves, one whose new uniform was rolled up several times at the arms and legs, leaped out of the Christmas tree and slid down on a snow pile, where the arms of the snow people invited them in. Another branch of the tree snapped, then broke completely. The Kandrona dropped, wedging itself in the fork of the branch just below. The entire top was engulfed in flames now, and the last remaining fire elves descended, joining the rest outside. A red-tailed hawk circled the tree topper as the fire burned through the remaining branches, and the Kandrona fell, breaking branches on its way down, shattering the glass block floor below, crashing through the light well, down into the flames, exploding onto the stone floor underground. A reindeer was the first to see it falling and flew over, followed by more reindeer, pulling away the wreckage and helping snow people free elves trapped underneath. Visser 3 saw it too, and knew Christmas was ruined for him. Abandoning the Hork-Bajir, still fighting Santa alongside him, he dashed up the ramp and into his blade ship. The greenery and tinsel decorating the exterior was annoying, but no time to fix that now. He was at the helm in no time, blasting off directly up the ramp and into the night sky. Aware that the Kandrona was destroyed, the Yeerks controlling elves, humans, and Hork-Bajir fled from their host's bodies in a desperate bid to escape. The slug-like creatures dropped to the ground everywhere, where they were trampled by snow people, reindeer, and one very happy turtle dove. Outside, the fire elves were huddled together. A light snow began to fall, dusting their all-black uniforms with a white coat. It was strange, shivering now after what they had just been through. In a large ring around them, dozens of snow people remained vigilant, but keeping their distance. A fire elf in a baggy uniform walked right up to the closest snow person, easily doubled the elf's size. "Season's greetings," she said, sticking out her hand. "We're fire elves, and we owe you our lives." The snow person made a guttural noise that Dancer had said was their spoken language. They extended a hand as well, and shook the hand of the fire elf for the first time in their collective histories. "So," Rachel said, "you have an ice castle? You should check out the Union Hall sometime."
At the reindeer hangar, the Animorphs were buzzing with excitement, talking as quickly as they could, recounting the day from each of their perspectives. Gradley was with them, and Dancer, who had carried Tom on his back the whole way. Tom was awake, but very groggy. The hangar was a flurry of activity, with elves running in more directions than could be counted, the other reindeer conferring with each other, going over final details with Santa. Santa broke off from the group and joined the Animorphs. "Well, just a few more items on my checklist before we taxi on the runway and prepare for takeoff." "Is there still time for, Christmas?" asked Marco. "Marco," I said. "I don't know what all you may have heard about my powers from those hideous Yeerks. However, They did get a little bit of it right. Of course there is time for Christmas, and from the outside looking in, no one will notice any difference. Space time, Marco said. You can do it! Ho ho ho! I laughed. Space time manipulation, a little magic, and of course, I'd be nowhere without these magnificent reindeer. That's something those Yerks got wrong. The reindeer and I are a team, and none of us could pull off what we do without the rest of us. Without all of us, I said, turning to grab the lei. The fire elves, for instance. Where would any of us be if they hadn't kept together all along? They were undivided, even when faced with their own demise. There will be lots of extra candy canes for you this year. Sorry? Rachel started. Candy canes? For once, Gradley looked embarrassed as she stared at her boots. He pays you in candy canes? Rachel continued. Gradley, you need money. Santa, these fire elves also want collective bargaining. They have a lot of other good ideas too for this factory you run. What? All the other Animorphs were staring at her, amazed at Rachel's willingness to confront Santa on labor policy. Dancer was the one who broke the silence. We reindeer have had collective bargaining for years, not to mention paid time off, and vision and dental. Santa, the fire elves don't? Ho, 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 okay, Rachel. I think there's going to be some more changes around the North Pole this year. If we've seen anything from all this, it's that we are stronger together. Just like you Animorphs, I said. I still can't believe you morphed into a person, Rachel, and kept your uniform on, said Cassie. If we can morph into people, this sets up so many new stories. Maybe, said Gradley. I'm not exactly human, though. We elves do have some magic ourselves. She turned to face Santa now. We do have some concerns we'd like addressed. But after tonight, it's nearly Christmas after all. She could see reindeer strapping in as they prepared for departure. Speaking of magic, Tobias said to Santa, do you know what the snow people decided yet? No, Tobias, not yet, I replied. I will go to their parliament tomorrow after they've had a chance to discuss the matter among themselves. It's up to them whether they want their melted snow people to be reanimated or not. Life and death have a different meaning to them than they might to you humans. Magic alone sustains or destroys them. Why would anyone use magic to destroy them? Sounds like dark magic, Tobias said. There is no light or dark magic, Tobias. Just magic. And how it's chosen to be used. If it's wielded to accrue power at the expense of others, that would make it unacceptable. The same as the Yerks. It's their unrelenting push for power and willingness to destroy that makes them the threat they've become. Anyway, I have to get to the sleigh for the final prep. Dancer, I know you have goodbyes, but I need you with us in 2 minutes. Animorphs, I also need you at the sleigh in 5. We've got to get you back to your cabins before Christmas morning. And I also know a lot of Angelite children who would be very disappointed if there weren't presents under their trees on Christmas morning. At that, I winked and turned toward the sleigh, waving a hand at my reindeer team. Whoa, said Marco. Did you hear that? Angelite children. He stopped, as everyone else was already looking at Dancer. Well, Animorphs, Dancer began. While I wish the reasons you had arrived at the North Pole had been more favorable, I'm truly honored to have met you all. A team that perhaps will be even more renowned than Santa's reindeer. Marco, Jacob, Rachel, Tobias, Cassandra. From all of us, you are welcome, as humans, at the Reindeer Council, always. I sincerely hope to see you in the North Pole again under more agreeable circumstances. This is not goodbye. I will be pulling the sleigh to return you home tonight, and I will never forget the Animorphs. Jacob, your brother will make a full recovery and will be all the better when he wakes up in the morning among people who love him. I have to go to the sleigh. He didn't move, and Cassie stepped forward. She placed both hands on either side of Danto's head and leaned her forehead against his. Season's greetings always, Cassandra, he said, my little Dancer. Cassie stepped back, and Dancer scooped up Tom, flying over to place him in Santa's sleigh before taking his place in line ahead. I'm gonna make sure Tom is comfortable, Jake said. He looked at his friends and grabbed the lei. Thank you, all of you. I know I can be the worst sometimes. You all... He stopped, overwhelmed with the looks on his friends' faces. Jake, grabbed the lei addressed him. Get to your brother. He needs you, just like we all need each other. She stepped forward and threw her arms around him for a moment. You're a good one, Jake, she said, as he jogged over to the sleigh. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with Jake, said Marco. Grab the lei, season's greetings. He gave her an awkward, sideways, one-armed hug, even as she fully embraced him. I'm going too, said Cassie. I want to make sure Jake's alright, you know? Tobias, you coming? Yeah, he said, lifting his wings. Wait just a minute, you guys. We leave together. They both paused as Rachel spoke. She turned to grab the lei. Rachel was fighting back tears, even though she knew it would be totally fine to release everything she was feeling at that moment. Grab the lei, she said. You're a fucking badass. She was crying and laughing now. I'm coming back for the sit-in if Santa doesn't do something about these fucking wages. And Grab the lei was cry laughing now too. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but if it does, we're ready. Also, I have something for you. She reached into one of the deep zipper pockets on her jumpsuit uniform, pulled out a small box and handed it to Rachel. We grabbed them from the hall this morning, just in case something happened. Rachel examined the box, then looked back to grab the lei, still cry laughing. Should I open it now? She asked. Yeah, of course, yes. Yeah, Grab the lei replied. Rachel flipped the gold latch and opened the hinged box. Inside, resting in the shaped, cushioned container, was a pristine flint and steel. She recognized it as one that had been in the display case at UFE Local number 809. Grab the lei, what? Rachel asked. It's one of the 3 oldest flint and steels we have, passed down for at least 30 generations of fire elves. I can't, Rachel interjected. You can. They're saved to be passed on to the newest generations of fire elves, said Grab the lei. And so there's always a few circulating over millennia. You're the newest fire elf. This belongs to you. Rachel held the box in her hand. Standing there in her uniform, flint and steel in hand, she was a fire elf. She took the flint in one hand and the steel in the other, holding them up to examine closer. She lowered her hands, determining how to strike it, Whoa, maybe not in here though, Gravelay said with a smile. True fire elf though, with that instinct. She was watching Santa, now seated in his sleigh, all the reindeer in their 2 lines beginning to hover inches off the ground. Better get going. Only one flight out of here tonight, Gravelay said to the remaining Animorphs. Rachel returned the flint and steel to the box, placed the box in her jumpsuit uniform pocket, and hugged Gravelay close. Burn it down, Rachel whispered before stepping back to leave. Cassie likewise embraced Gravelay, and Tobias let her run her hands over his head and down his back. Rachel and Cassie ran toward the sleigh while Tobias flew above them. The whole rig was over a foot in the air, and they could see Santa was ready to go. As they slipped into the sleigh, Cassie yelled, "Dancer, we're ready. Let's see the finest reindeer fleet do what it does best." Dancer turned and smiled as the reindeer began to pull the sleigh out of the hangar and onto the runway. Air traffic control elves lined both sides of the runway, waving red and green light sticks to direct the sleigh forward. The reindeer positioned the sleigh at the end of the runway, paused for a moment, awaiting clearance. "Whoa," said Jake, turning from Tom, who was asleep next to him, to survey the scene all around him. Beautiful. The reindeer accelerated into motion, now flying down the runway and up and off into the snowy night sky. As the North Pole flew away below them, Santa said, "Season's greetings and Merry Christmas. Peace on earth and goodwill to all." "Yeah, but not to Yerks," said Marco. The end.
Ho, ho, ho!
This has been B.T Aldrich Presents A Very Animorphs Christmas. Have a very happy holidays and a happy new